Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation Cracks. Mitchell Bright had built his life like he built his construction empire, methodically, with precision, and on solid ground. At 42, he commanded respect from contractors across 3 states. His company Bright Foundations, known for projects that stood the test of time. His calloused hands and sharp mind had carved success from nothing, starting with a single truck and ending with a fleet of equipment worth millions. The suburban mansion in Westfield wasn't just his home. It was his monument. Every beam, every nail, every carefully planned detail reflected the man who refused to accept anything less than perfection. His wife Carol had decorated it with expensive tastes that Mitchell indulged, believing a successful man should provide the best for his family. Mitchell's relationship with Carol Pitts had begun 15 years ago at a charity auction. She was 25 then, working as an event coordinator with honey blonde hair and a smile that could light up boardrooms. He was 27, already showing promise in construction, his dark eyes intense with ambition. Their courtship was swift. Carol appreciated security, and Mitchell appreciated beauty and grace. "You're going to be something special," Carol had whispered on their wedding night. "I can feel it." Their daughter Sarah arrived 2 years later, a perfect blend of Mitchell's determination and Carol's charm. Now 13, she was Mitchell's pride, intelligent, athletic, with her father's unflinching honesty and her mother's social ease. But perfection, Mitchell had learned, was a fragile thing. The first crack appeared 6 months ago. Carol had started working late at her boutique downtown, Elegance and Style, which she'd opened 5 years earlier with Mitchell's backing. She hired Derek Todd as a store manager, a smooth-talking man in his mid-30s with an easy smile and expensive clothes that somehow fit perfectly on a retail salary. Mitchell had met Derek twice. Both times, something about the man's overly firm handshake and too long eye contact with Carol set Mitchell's instincts on edge. But he'd built his fortune by trusting his judgment about people, not paranoia. "Derek's been invaluable," Carol would say during dinner, her eyes brightening in a way that used to be reserved for Mitchell alone. "The sales numbers have never been better." Mitchell noticed other changes. Carol's phone, once left casually on counters, now stayed glued to her hand. She developed sudden interest in yoga classes that ran until 9 p.m. Their bedroom conversations, once filled with shared dreams, became polite exchanges about schedules and household logistics. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in March. Mitchell had returned early from a job site meeting, hoping to surprise Carol with dinner reservations at their favorite restaurant, the place where he'd proposed. The house was empty except for Sarah, who was in her room working on algebra homework. "Where's your mom?" Mitchell asked, loosening his tie. "Store meeting," Sarah replied without looking up from her textbook. She said she'd be really late tonight. Something cold settled in Mitchell's chest. He'd called the store earlier to confirm dinner plans. No answer. Now he knew why. Over the next 3 weeks, Mitchell conducted surveillance with the same methodical precision he applied to construction projects. He hired Roger Valencia, a former police detective who now ran a private investigation firm. The photos Roger delivered were crisp, damning evidence. Carol and Derek entering a downtown hotel, leaving Derek's apartment on Tuesday afternoons, sharing intimate dinners at restaurants 50 miles from town. But Mitchell was a strategic man. He didn't confront them immediately. Instead, he began documenting everything: finances, communications, schedules. He discovered Carol had opened a secret credit card, charging expensive gifts that never made it home. Derek, meanwhile, had a history of relationships with married women and a credit report that suggested a man living beyond his means. The game had changed, but Mitchell Bright had always been better at playing the long game than his opponents realized. His investigation revealed that Derek wasn't just pursuing Carol for romance. The man had gambling debts, serious ones. Mitchell's contacts in the construction world had connections everywhere, including people who knew about Derek's weekend poker games that had spiraled into $30,000 losses to very dangerous individuals. Mitchell realized he wasn't just dealing with infidelity. He was looking at predators who saw his family as their solution. That night, Mitchell sat in his study until dawn, surrounded by photographs and financial records, planning his response with the same careful attention he'd give to a 50-story foundation. Some structures, he knew, needed to be demolished completely before rebuilding could begin. The question wasn't whether he would act. The question was how completely he would destroy them. Chapter 2. The Web Titans. 2 months after discovering the betrayal, Mitchell had transformed into someone even his closest business associates wouldn't recognize. During the day, he maintained his routine, job sites, meetings, family dinners where he played the loving, unsuspecting husband. But his evenings belonged to preparation. Mitchell's home office, which Carol rarely entered, became his war room. Hidden behind false panels in his desk were dossiers on Derek Todd and his associates, financial records, and surveillance equipment that would make federal agents envious. Roger Valencia continued providing intelligence, but Mitchell's own investigation had revealed depths to Derek's character that went beyond simple adultery. Derek Todd wasn't just a store manager with gambling problems. Through careful investigation of his employment history, Mitchell discovered a pattern. Derek targeted women in comfortable marriages, particularly those with access to business finances. His previous relationships had ended with mysterious business loans that were never repaid and partnerships that dissolved under questionable circumstances. Carol wasn't Derek's first mark. She was just his most ambitious target. Mitchell's construction empire provided perfect cover for his activities. His projects required extensive background checks on subcontractors, giving him legitimate reasons to access financial databases. His relationships with city officials, built over 2 decades of reliable work, opened doors that might otherwise remain closed. During a Thursday evening, when Carol claimed to be attending a retail conference in the state capitol, Mitchell followed them to Derek's apartment. Through borrowed surveillance equipment, officially rented for security surveys at construction sites, he recorded conversations that revealed the true scope of their betrayal. "She trusts you completely." Derek's voice came through the receiver, tinny but clear. "The business accounts, the investment portfolio, she has access to everything." "I can't just transfer money, Derek," Carol replied, her voice carrying a calculating edge Mitchell had never heard before. "Mitchell isn't stupid. He watches everything." "Then we make him not want to watch," Derek said. "Create problems at home. Make him focus on other things. I've done this before, baby." Rich husbands get sloppy when their world starts falling apart. Mitchell sat in his truck outside Derek's apartment building, listening to his wife of 15 years plan his financial destruction with the clinical detachment of a surgeon. But what followed chilled him even further. "What about Sarah?" Carol asked. "Kids adapt," Derek replied dismissively. "She'll be fine with whatever story we tell her. Besides, once we're set up properly, we won't need to worry about Bright's opinions on custody arrangements." That night, Mitchell made a decision that would alter the trajectory of everything that followed. His investigation expanded beyond Derek and Carol to include Derek's associates, the people he owed money to, his family members, and most importantly, his previous victims. Through Roger Valencia's contacts, Mitchell located Patricia Elder, Derek's former target from 2 years earlier. Patricia had lost her marriage, her bakery business, and nearly her home before discovering Derek's true nature. She lived now in a small apartment across town, working double shifts at a medical clinic to rebuild her life. Mitchell met Patricia at a coffee shop on a rainy Sunday afternoon, introducing himself as a concerned citizen who'd encountered Derek in a business context. "He has a system," Patricia explained, her hands trembling slightly around her coffee cup. "He finds women who have access to money but feel neglected. He's patient, months of building trust, making them feel special again. Then he starts asking for small favors. Business loans that never get repaid. Access to accounts for temporary problems. By the time you realize what's happening, you're in too deep to just walk away." "What stopped you?" Mitchell asked. Patricia's laugh was bitter. "My husband hired a private investigator. Found out Derek had done the same thing to 3 other women in our area. But the damage was done. Tom couldn't forgive the betrayal, financial and personal. The business was ruined, And the marriage? She shrugged. Some things can't be rebuilt. Mitchell left that meeting with something beyond anger. He had clarity. Derek Todd was a professional predator, and Carol had become his willing accomplice. They weren't just threatening his marriage. They were threatening his daughter's future, his life's work, and everything he built through decades of honest labor. Over the following weeks, Mitchell began implementing a strategy that would leverage his construction empire, his reputation, and his knowledge of both Derek and Carol's vulnerabilities. He started by quietly transferring assets into protected accounts, securing his daughter's college fund and his business operations from potential theft. But protection was only the first phase. Mitchell Bright had learned long ago that some foundations needed to be demolished completely before new structures could be built. Derek and Carol had made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated the man they were betraying. Chapter 3. The Trigger. 3 months into Mitchell's careful preparation, the game accelerated beyond his control in the worst possible way. It was a Thursday afternoon when his phone rang with a call that would transform methodical planning into immediate, brutal action. Mr. Bright, this is Memorial Hospital. Your daughter Sarah has been admitted to the emergency room. Mitchell's world compressed to a single point of white-hot focus. He left his job site immediately, ignoring the shouted questions from his foreman, and drove to the hospital with precision born from years of navigating crisis situations. Sarah lay in the hospital bed looking smaller than her 13 years, her left side wrapped in bandages, her face pale but alert. Dr. Julia Rankin, the attending physician, met Mitchell in the hallway before he entered the room. 2 broken ribs, Dr. Rankin explained, her voice professional but concerned. Some bruising on her back and shoulders. The pattern suggests she was slammed against a solid surface, probably a wall. She's been asking for you. Mitchell entered Sarah's room with the controlled calm that had served him through decades of managing complex projects. But inside, a cold fury was building that went beyond anything he'd felt during months of discovering Carol's betrayal. Dad, Sarah whispered as he took her hand. Her voice was steady, but Mitchell could see the fear she was trying to hide. I need to tell you something, and you have to promise not to get mad. I'm not mad at you, sweetheart. Tell me what happened. Sarah's story emerged in careful pieces. She'd gone to the boutique after school to surprise her mother, wanted to show her an A+ on her science project. The store was officially closed, but she'd seen lights in the back office and used the spare key Carol had given her for emergencies. Mom was there with Derek, Sarah continued, her voice growing smaller. They were kissing and stuff. When they saw me, Mom got really upset, but Derek got angry. Mitchell's hands remained gentle on his daughter's, but every muscle in his body was coiling with controlled violence. Derek grabbed my arm and dragged me to the back room, Sarah said. He slammed me against the wall and said if I told you what I saw, he'd kill you. He said Mom needed to choose between her old life and her new one, and I was just making things complicated. The final piece of Sarah's account struck Mitchell like a physical blow. Mom just stood there, Dad. She didn't stop him. She didn't help me. She just kept saying, this is all too much. This is too much. After Sarah had escaped and called for help from a neighbor, Carol had apparently coached her to claim she'd fallen downstairs at school. The hospital staff had immediately recognized the injuries as assault-related, not accidental trauma. Dr. Rankin later confided to Mitchell that Sarah had initially tried to maintain the false story, but broke down when medical evidence clearly contradicted her account. She's protecting someone, the doctor had said, but whoever hurt her needs to face consequences. Mitchell spent the evening at Sarah's bedside, helping her with homework and watching her favorite movies on the hospital television, maintaining the appearance of a concerned father dealing with an unfortunate accident. But internally, he was recalibrating every plan. Derek Todd had crossed the line from financial predator to child abuser. Carol had witnessed the assault and chosen to cover it up rather than protect their daughter. That night, after Sarah fell asleep, Mitchell sat in the hospital chair and made a series of phone calls. He called his lawyer about emergency custody measures. He called Roger Valencia about immediate surveillance of Derek's movements. And he called his brother-in-law Albert Greenwood, who ran a security consulting firm and had connections that operated in legal gray areas. Albert, Mitchell said quietly into the phone, I need the kind of help that doesn't leave paperwork trails. What happened, Mitch? Someone hurt Sarah, and they threatened to kill me if she talked. There was a long pause before Albert responded. I'll be there in 2 hours. Don't do anything until I arrive. But Mitchell had already made his decision. The methodical, legal approach he'd been planning for months was no longer sufficient. Derek Todd had made it personal in a way that demanded immediate, permanent resolution. Carol had made her choice by standing aside while their daughter was assaulted. Now Mitchell would show them both what happened when someone threatened his child. The careful game was over. The war was about to begin. Chapter 4. The Hunt Begins. Albert Greenwood arrived at the hospital at midnight, his appearance as unremarkable as his business required. Average height, forgettable features, and clothes that could blend into any crowd. But Mitchell knew his brother-in-law's background. 10 years in military intelligence followed by 15 years running security consultations for clients who needed problems solved quietly. They met in the hospital parking garage, away from cameras and curious ears. Tell me everything, Albert said without preamble. Mitchell laid out the full scope of Derek and Carol's betrayal, from the financial planning to Sarah's assault. Albert listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with each detail. The daughter's safety is priority one, Albert said finally. Everything else can wait. She's safe here tonight. Hospital security, and I've arranged private protection through your people starting tomorrow. Albert nodded approvingly. Good. Now, about your problem with Todd. I assume you want this handled permanently? Mitchell's response came without hesitation. Derek Todd hurt my daughter and threatened to kill me. Carol helped cover it up. I want them to understand that some actions have consequences that can't be negotiated away. Understood. But we do this smart, Mitch. You've built too much to throw it away on revenge, no matter how justified. Over the next 3 days, while Sarah recovered at home under the protection of Albert's carefully selected security team, Mitchell and Albert developed a strategy that would destroy Derek and Carol's lives as thoroughly as they had attempted to destroy his. The first phase targeted Derek's vulnerabilities. Through Albert's connections, they identified Derek's gambling debts in detail. $38,000 owed to Miguel Noble, who ran high-stakes poker games for clients who didn't accept payment plans. Miguel's collection methods were both effective and permanent. Albert arranged a meeting with Miguel at a construction site Mitchell owned on the outskirts of town. Miguel arrived with 2 associates, men whose presence suggested they were accustomed to handling problems that required physical solutions. Your boy Derek Todd owes me money, Miguel said after Albert made introductions. He's been avoiding my calls. We might be able to help with that, Mitchell replied. But I need something in return. Miguel listened with interest as Mitchell explained Derek's assault on Sarah and his threats. In Miguel's world, men who hurt children occupied a special category of targets. You want him scared or you want him gone? Miguel asked bluntly. I want him to understand that actions have consequences, Mitchell said carefully. But I also want it clean. No connections back to my family. Miguel smiled. Derek's got a payment meeting with me tomorrow night. Maybe he'll have an accident on the way home. Maybe his car breaks down in the wrong neighborhood. These things happen. Phase 2 targeted Carol's support system. Through Roger Valencia's investigation, Mitchell learned that Carol had been planning to leave him for months, moving money into accounts Derek could access and preparing to claim half of Mitchell's construction empire in divorce proceedings. But Carol's planning had a fatal flaw. She trusted Derek completely. And Derek, as Mitchell now knew, was a professional predator whose interest in Carol would evaporate the moment her access to Mitchell's money was threatened. Mitchell decided to accelerate their timeline. Working through Albert's connections, Mitchell arranged for Carol to receive what appeared to be an anonymous tip about Derek's history with other women. Photos of Derek with his previous targets, financial records showing his pattern of relationship-based theft, and testimony from Patricia Elder were compiled into a package that would shatter Carol's illusions about her lover's motives. The package was delivered to the boutique on a Friday afternoon when Derek was away meeting with suppliers. Mitchell watched from his truck across the street as Carol opened the envelope, saw her face go white as she processed the evidence, and then saw her make frantic phone calls that went unanswered. Derek, meanwhile, was dealing with his own crisis. Miguel's payment meeting had gone exactly as planned. Derek now understood that his gambling debts had become the least of his problems. Someone was actively hunting him, and his usual charm wouldn't provide protection. By Sunday evening, both Derek and Carol were in full panic mode, each believing they were under attack from unknown enemies, while unaware that their relationship was being deliberately torn apart from within. Mitchell maintained his facade of concerned husband and father, staying close to Sarah and avoiding any direct contact with Carol's growing paranoia. But he was systematically dismantling the life Carol and Derek had planned to steal from him. The real devastation was yet to come. Chapter 5. The Collapse. By Monday morning, Carol's world was disintegrating faster than she could comprehend. The anonymous package had revealed Derek's history with surgical precision: financial fraud, abandoned women, and most damaging, evidence that he'd been planning the same fate for her from the beginning. Mitchell watched from his study as Carol made increasingly desperate phone calls to Derek, who had disappeared entirely after his meeting with Miguel Noble. What Carol didn't know was that Derek was currently hiding in a motel 40 miles away, nursing a dislocated shoulder and trying to understand why dangerous men were suddenly hunting him. The beauty of Mitchell's strategy was its efficiency. He was using Derek and Carol's own betrayal as the weapon to destroy them. Tuesday afternoon brought the call Mitchell had been expecting. Carol finally reached Derek at his motel hideout, and their conversation, recorded through surveillance equipment Albert's team had placed in Derek's phone, revealed the complete collapse of their partnership. "You used me." Carol's voice came through the speaker in Mitchell's office. "All those women in the files, I was just another mark." "Baby, those files are fake," Derek replied, but his voice carried the desperation of a man whose lies were catching up to him. "Someone's trying to break us up. They want to keep us from being together." "The financial records aren't fake, Derek. The bank statements showing what you stole from Patricia Elder and the others, those are real." There was a long pause before Derek's response revealed his true character. "Look, Carol, maybe we should take a break. Things are getting complicated, and I've got some business problems to handle." "Business problems?" "Derek, I left my husband for you. I let you hurt my daughter to protect our secret. And now you want to take a break?" Mitchell's grip tightened on his coffee cup. Even facing complete exposure, Carol was more concerned about Derek abandoning her than about the assault on Sarah. Derek's final betrayal was swift and brutal. "Your daughter came to the store at the wrong time. That's not my fault. And honestly, Carol, you're not as valuable as you think you are. I can find other opportunities." The line went dead. Carol had been abandoned by her lover and left to face the consequences of their betrayal alone. Wednesday brought Carol's attempt at reconciliation. She appeared in Mitchell's office at the construction company, tears streaming down her face, prepared to confess everything in hopes of salvaging their marriage. "Mitchell, I've made terrible mistakes," she began. "Derek Todd. He manipulated me, made me believe things about our marriage that weren't true. I want to come home. I want to fix this." Mitchell looked up from his blueprints with the calm expression he'd perfected over months of deception. "What about Sarah?" Carol's face went white. "What do you mean?" "Sarah's injuries from last week. The assault that put her in the hospital. You were there, Carol. You watched Derek hurt our daughter, and you tried to cover it up." "I was scared," Carol whispered. "Derek said if I told the truth, he'd hurt you too. I was trying to protect everyone." Mitchell set down his pen and looked at his wife with the cold assessment he might give to a failed building foundation. "You protected Derek. You protected your secret. You sacrificed our daughter's safety to maintain your affair." "Mitchell, please." "No." The single word carried 15 years of marriage and the finality of absolute judgment. "You made your choice when you stood by and watched him assault Sarah. Everything after that is just consequences." Carol left his office understanding that their marriage was over, but she didn't yet understand how completely Mitchell intended to destroy the life she tried to steal from him. Thursday evening, Carol's destruction accelerated. Roger Valencia had spent weeks documenting every financial irregularity Carol had created. The secret credit cards, the business loans Derek had convinced her to approve, the money she'd moved to accounts Derek could access. The evidence was delivered to Carol's divorce attorney, along with a comprehensive report on Derek's criminal history. Carol discovered that filing for divorce wouldn't give her access to half of Mitchell's empire. Instead, her documented financial fraud and child endangerment meant she would be fighting to avoid criminal charges while losing everything she'd thought was guaranteed. Friday brought the final collapse. Derek Todd, desperate and abandoned, made the mistake of returning to town to retrieve money he'd hidden in the boutique. Miguel Noble's associates were waiting for him. The details of Derek's final encounter were handled discreetly, but the message was clear. Men who hurt children and threatened families face consequences that went beyond legal proceedings. Carol found Derek's body in the boutique Saturday morning. The official cause of death would be listed as a heart attack brought on by extreme stress, but Carol understood she was looking at the result of forces beyond her control or comprehension. By Sunday evening, Carol Bright had lost her lover, her marriage, her business, and any hope of the comfortable future she'd planned to steal. She was facing criminal charges, financial ruin, and the knowledge that her betrayal had cost her the only family she'd ever known. Mitchell, meanwhile, had protected his daughter, preserved his empire, and eliminated the threats to his family with the same methodical precision he brought to every construction project. Some foundations, he reflected, needed to be demolished completely before rebuilding could begin. Chapter 6. The Reckoning. In the weeks following Derek's death, Mitchell consolidated his victory with the same systematic approach he'd used to build his construction empire. Carol's attempt to claim half his assets in divorce proceedings had collapsed under the weight of evidence documenting her fraud and complicity in child endangerment. Sarah was recovering well, both physically and emotionally, under the care of Dr. Julia Rankin and a family therapist Albert had recommended. The 14-year-old had shown remarkable resilience, but Mitchell knew the betrayal by her mother would leave scars that required careful attention. "Dad," Sarah said one evening as they worked on her algebra homework, "why did Mom choose Derek over us?" Mitchell set down his pen and looked at his daughter with the same honesty he'd always given her. "Some people make choices based on what they want in the moment instead of what's right for the people they're supposed to protect. Your mother forgot that being a parent means putting your child's safety above everything else. Will she ever come back?" "No, sweetheart. Some choices can't be undone." Sarah nodded with a maturity that broke Mitchell's heart. "I understand. I just want to make sure you weren't going to change your mind and forgive her." Mitchell's response was immediate and firm. "I will never forgive anyone who hurts you or threatens our family. That's a promise." Carol's final attempt at reconciliation came through her attorney, offering to confess to fraud charges in exchange for supervised visitation with Sarah. Mitchell's response was delivered by his own legal team. Any attempt to contact Sarah would result in additional criminal charges and civil litigation that would leave Carol with nothing. The boutique had been closed permanently, its assets seized to pay debts Derek had created in restitution for his previous victims. Carol was living in a studio apartment across town, working at a discount retail store for minimum wage while awaiting trial on fraud charges that would likely result in prison time. Mitchell felt no satisfaction in her destruction, only the cold certainty that justice had been served. The investigation into Derek's death had concluded exactly as Albert had predicted. Derek Todd, a man with known gambling debts and a history of fraud, had suffered a fatal heart attack brought on by stress and poor health decisions. The case was closed without any connection to Mitchell or his associates. Miguel Noble had been particularly satisfied with the arrangement. "Men who hurt children don't deserve to worry about debt collection," he'd told Albert. "Some problems solve themselves." 3 months after Derek's death, Mitchell received an unexpected visitor. Patricia Elder appeared at his office on a Thursday afternoon, carrying a manila envelope. "Mr. Bright," she said, "I wanted to thank you for what you did." Mitchell maintained his careful expression. "I'm not sure what you mean." Patricia smiled sadly. "Derek Todd destroyed my life 2 years ago. When he died, I thought it was just random justice. But then I started hearing rumors about you, about what he'd done to your daughter. I realized someone had made sure he faced consequences for all the women he'd hurt." She placed the envelope on Mitchell's desk. These are copies of financial records Derek stole from me. Evidence I was never able to use because I was too scared to fight him. I thought you might want them, in case anyone ever questions whether Derek Todd got what he deserved. Mitchell accepted the envelope without opening it. What will you do now? Rebuild, Patricia said simply. Just like you're doing. Some of us get second chances because other people make sure predators can't keep hunting. After Patricia left, Mitchell locked the envelope in his safe next to the other evidence of Derek and Carol's betrayal. He would never need the documentation, but its existence was a reminder that some victories required thorough preparation. That evening, Mitchell and Sarah had dinner at their favorite restaurant, the same place where he planned to take Carol on the night he discovered her betrayal. They talked about Sarah's plans for high school, her interest in engineering, and her determination to follow her father's example of building things that lasted. "Dad," Sarah said as they shared dessert, "do you think Mom ever really loved us?" Mitchell considered the question carefully. "I think your mother loved the idea of the life we could give her. But real love means protecting the people who matter most, even when it's difficult. Your mother chose the easy path instead of the right path." And Derek? Derek was a predator who saw our family as something he could exploit. He never loved anyone. He just used people until they were no longer valuable to him. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "I'm glad they're gone." Mitchell reached across the table and took his daughter's hand. "They can't hurt us anymore. That's what matters." As they drove home through the familiar streets of Westfield, past construction sites Mitchell's company had built in neighborhoods where families lived in houses his foundation supported, Mitchell reflected on the choices that had brought him to this moment. He had protected his daughter, preserved his empire, and eliminated threats to his family with the same precision he brought to every important project. Carol and Derek had underestimated the man they tried to destroy, and they'd paid the ultimate price for their betrayal. Some foundations, Mitchell knew, were built to last forever. Others needed to be demolished completely before new construction could begin. The choice between those outcomes always belonged to the people who decided whether to build or destroy. Chapter 7. New Foundations. 6 months after Derek's death, Mitchell's life had settled into a routine that balanced single parenthood with running his construction empire. Sarah was thriving. Her grades had improved, she'd joined the debate team, and she was showing genuine interest in the engineering principles Mitchell explained during their weekend visits to job sites. "The foundation is everything," Mitchell told Sarah as they watched his crew pour concrete for a new office complex. "If you build it right, everything else can withstand whatever storms come later." Sarah nodded, making notes in the engineering journal Mitchell had given her. At 14, she was already thinking about college applications and career paths that would let her build something lasting. Mitchell's relationship with his daughter had grown stronger through the crisis they'd survived together. Sarah understood that her father would never forgive betrayal, but she also knew his protection was absolute and unconditional. The lesson had shaped her character in ways that would serve her well in life. The legal proceedings against Carol had concluded with a plea agreement, 18 months in minimum security prison for fraud, followed by 5 years of probation. She would never again have unsupervised access to Sarah, and her financial obligations for restitution would keep her working low-wage jobs for the foreseeable future. Mitchell felt no sympathy for her situation. Carol had made her choices with full knowledge of the consequences. The fact that she'd misjudged the man she was betraying was simply poor planning on her part. But Carol's story wasn't finished. On a Tuesday afternoon in October, Roger Valencia called Mitchell with information that threatened to complicate their carefully constructed victory. "Carol's been talking," Roger said without preamble. "She's in county lockup pending transfer to state prison, and she's been telling other inmates about Derek's death. Claims it wasn't natural causes." Mitchell felt the familiar cold focus that had served him through months of planning and execution. "What exactly is she saying?" "She thinks you had Derek killed. She can't prove it, but she's convinced someone murdered him and made it look like a heart attack. The problem is, she's talking to women who have nothing to lose and connections to people who might listen." "Is she a threat?" "Not directly, but if the wrong person decides to investigate Derek's death more carefully, they might find connections we'd prefer stay buried." Mitchell made his decision with the same efficiency he'd shown throughout the entire crisis. Set up a meeting. 3 days later, Mitchell visited Carol at the county detention center. She looked older than her 37 years. The stress of losing everything had aged her dramatically. When she saw Mitchell through the bulletproof glass, her expression shifted between hope and fear. "You came," she said through the phone receiver. "I came to give you a choice," Mitchell replied. "The same kind of choice you gave Sarah when Derek was hurting her." Carol's face went white. "Mitchell, I know what you did to Derek. I know you had him killed. Derek Todd died of a heart attack. The medical examiner confirmed it. The case is closed. You know people. You have connections. You made it happen." Mitchell leaned forward slightly, his voice never rising above conversational level. "Carol, you have 18 months to think about your future. When you get out, you can rebuild your life quietly, or you can continue making accusations about things that didn't happen. But I want you to understand something very clearly." He paused, ensuring she understood the weight of his words. "Derek threatened to kill me if Sarah talked about what he did to her. You stood by and watched him assault our daughter. You chose to protect your affair instead of protecting her. Derek paid the price for threatening my family. The choice you make now will determine whether you pay a similar price." Carol's hands were shaking as she gripped the phone. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm explaining consequences," Mitchell said calmly. "Derek thought he could hurt my daughter and threaten my life without facing justice. He was wrong. If you continue spreading lies about his death, you'll discover that some mistakes can't be corrected." The conversation lasted less than 10 minutes. When Mitchell left the detention center, he was confident that Carol understood her position. She could serve her time quietly and rebuild what was left of her life, or she could continue challenging the man who'd already demonstrated his willingness to protect his family by any means necessary. Carol chose survival. The stories about Derek's death stopped circulating through the county jail, and Carol began focusing on the prison job training programs that might give her employable skills when she was released. That evening, Mitchell and Sarah celebrated her acceptance into an advanced placement engineering program with dinner at the restaurant where they'd become a family of two. Sarah had grown into a confident young woman who understood that strength and intelligence were the foundation of everything worthwhile in life. "Dad," Sarah said as they walked to the car, "I know Mom thinks you had Derek killed." Mitchell stopped walking and looked at his daughter with complete honesty. "What do you think?" Sarah considered the question seriously. "I think Derek was the kind of person who made dangerous enemies. I think he died because he threatened people who don't accept threats. And I think you would do anything necessary to protect me. And you're comfortable with that?" "Dad, he hurt me and threatened to kill you. Whatever happened to him after that was justice." Mitchell put his arm around his daughter's shoulders as they continued to the car. Sarah understood that protection sometimes required actions that couldn't be discussed in polite company. More importantly, she understood that her father's love was absolute and unconditional. Some foundations were built to last generations. Mitchell was confident he'd created exactly that kind of legacy. Chapter 8, The Final Test. 2 years after Derek's death, Mitchell's life had achieved a stability that seemed unshakable. His construction empire continued to expand. Sarah was excelling in high school and planning for engineering school, and Carol had completed her prison sentence without causing additional problems. But peace, Mitchell had learned, was always temporary. The challenge came from an unexpected direction: Sarah's growing independence and her natural curiosity about the events that had shaped their family. At 16, she was mature enough to ask difficult questions and intelligent enough to research answers on her own. "Dad," Sarah said one evening as they reviewed her college applications, "I've been thinking about what happened with Mom and Derek. I want to understand the whole story." Mitchell set down his pen and looked at his daughter with the careful attention he'd always given her questions. "What specifically do you want to know?" "Everything. The timeline, the planning, the way Derek died. I know you protected us, but I want to understand how you did it." This was the conversation Mitchell had known would eventually come. Sarah was too intelligent to accept simple explanations forever, and her trust in him was complete enough that she deserved honest answers. Over the next hour, Mitchell explained the full scope of his investigation into Carol and Derek's betrayal, the strategic planning that had led to their destruction, and a network of connections that had made Derek's death possible without legal consequences. Sarah listened without interruption, asking clarifying questions that demonstrated her understanding of both the complexity and the necessity of his actions. "So Derek really did die of a heart attack," she said finally. "Yes, but it was a heart attack brought on by stress from people who wanted to collect gambling debts and punish him for threatening children. Sometimes justice works through indirect channels. And Mom never suspected the full extent of your planning. Your mother always underestimated me. She thought I was just a successful contractor who wouldn't notice her affair or couldn't respond effectively to betrayal. She was wrong about both assumptions." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "Good. I'm glad you destroyed them both." Mitchell studied his daughter's face, seeing not just acceptance but approval. Sarah understood that protection sometimes required actions that couldn't be justified through conventional morality. "Does it bother you that I was capable of those things?" Mitchell asked. "It bothers me that they forced you to be," Sarah replied. "But I'm proud that you were strong enough to protect us when it mattered." 3 months later, Carol made one final attempt to re-enter their lives. She appeared at Sarah's high school, apparently believing that 2 years in prison had earned her the right to approach her daughter directly. Sarah called Mitchell immediately. "She's in the parking lot," Sarah said, her voice calm but alert. "She wants to talk. She says she has rights as my mother." "Stay exactly where you are," Mitchell said. "I'll handle this." Mitchell arrived at the school within 15 minutes, accompanied by Albert Greenwood and a man Sarah didn't recognize, but whose presence suggested he was accustomed to handling problems that required intimidation rather than negotiation. Carol was waiting by her car, a 10-year-old sedan that reflected her diminished circumstances. When she saw Mitchell approach with his companions, her face showed the same fear she displayed during their conversation at the detention center. "I just want to talk to my daughter," Carol said before Mitchell could speak. "You lost that privilege when you chose to protect your lover instead of protecting Sarah," Mitchell replied. "You have no rights here, Carol. You have restraining orders and legal agreements that forbid this contact." "She's my child, too." Mitchell's response was delivered with the cold finality that had terminated their marriage 2 years earlier. "You stopped being her mother when you watched Derek assault her and said nothing. You're a stranger now, a dangerous stranger who threatens my daughter's peace of mind." The man standing beside Albert stepped forward slightly, his presence suggesting that Carol's departure could be voluntary or involuntary, but it would be immediate. Carol looked past Mitchell toward the school building, where Sarah was visible through a classroom window. "She's all I have left." "You should have thought about that before you betrayed her trust," Mitchell said. "Leave now, Carol. Don't come back. If you approach Sarah again, you'll discover that some people never get second chances." Carol left without further argument, understanding that her ex-husband's patience was a finite resource she'd already exhausted completely. That evening, Mitchell and Sarah discussed the encounter over dinner at home. "She looked older," Sarah observed. "Sadder. Prison and poverty will do that," Mitchell replied. "But her problems are the result of her choices, not our responsibility." "Do you think she'll try again?" "No. Carol understands consequences now. She knows that threatening our family's peace will result in responses she can't survive." Sarah nodded, satisfied with her father's assessment. "I'm glad you were there today. I didn't want to deal with her manipulation by myself." "You'll never have to deal with threats alone," Mitchell said. "That's what family means. Absolute protection, absolute loyalty, absolute consequences for anyone who threatens what we've built." As they cleaned up after dinner, Mitchell reflected on the test Carol's appearance had represented. Sarah had handled the situation with maturity and intelligence, understanding that some relationships couldn't be repaired and some people couldn't be trusted with second chances. The foundation Mitchell had built for their family was strong enough to withstand any future challenges. Sarah understood the principles that had guided his actions, and she was prepared to apply those same principles in her own life. Some lessons, Mitchell knew, were taught through demonstration rather than explanation. Sarah had learned that protection sometimes required hard choices, and that people who betrayed trust faced consequences that couldn't be negotiated away. The test was complete. The foundation would hold. Chapter 9. Legacy. 5 years after Derek's death, Mitchell Bright stood on the observation deck of the tallest building his company had ever constructed, a 40-story office complex that would anchor downtown development for the next century. At 47, he commanded an empire that stretched across 5 states and employed over 300 people. But his greatest achievement was standing beside him. Sarah, now 19 and in her sophomore year at MIT studying structural engineering, had spent her winter break working alongside Mitchell's crews, learning the practical applications of the theories she studied in Boston. She was brilliant, ambitious, and utterly without illusion about the price of success or the cost of betrayal. "The foundation goes down 80 feet, Sarah said, reviewing the building plans spread across the temporary table they'd set up on the observation deck. "The bedrock analysis shows it'll support twice the current load if we ever need to expand vertically." Mitchell smiled with pride. Sarah understood that every structure began with decisions made underground, in places nobody would see but everyone would depend on. The lesson applied to more than construction. "Your mother contacted my attorney last week," Mitchell said, passing Sarah a legal document. "She wants to request supervised visitation now that you're an adult." Sarah read the document carefully, then set it aside without emotion. "What did you tell him?" "I told him the decision was yours now. You're old enough to choose whether you want any relationship with a woman who watched Derek assault you and try to steal our family's future." Sarah's response was immediate and final. "I choose not to. Carol Pitts made her decision when I was 13 years old. I don't owe her forgiveness or second chances." Mitchell nodded approvingly. Sarah had learned the most important lesson he could teach. Some betrayals were permanent, and some choices couldn't be undone by regret or the passage of time. "What about her financial situation?" Sarah asked. "I heard she's been struggling. Carol works at a grocery store for minimum wage. She lives in a studio apartment and will be paying restitution for Derek's fraud for the next 15 years. Her life is exactly what she earned through her choices." "Good," Sarah said simply. "People should live with the consequences of their decisions." That evening, they had dinner at the same restaurant where Mitchell had proposed to Carol 20 years earlier, and where he and Sarah had celebrated becoming a family of 2. The location had come full circle, representing both the end of one foundation and the beginning of another. "I've been thinking about the future," Sarah said as they shared dessert. "After graduation, I want to join Bright Foundations as a junior partner. Eventually, I want to expand into sustainable infrastructure projects, bridges, water systems, buildings that can last for centuries." Mitchell felt a satisfaction deeper than any business success. Sarah understood that true wealth came from building things that outlasted their creators, and true power came from protecting what mattered most. "The company will be yours someday," Mitchell said. "Everything I've built is for you. But you have to understand what that inheritance includes." Sarah met his gaze with the steady confidence that had carried her through every challenge since childhood. "I understand completely. The business, the reputation, the connections, and the responsibility to protect all of it. Some people build things that last. Other people try to destroy what they can't create. Our job is to make sure the builders win. And if someone threatens what we've built, they'll discover that some mistakes have permanent consequences," Sarah replied without hesitation. Mitchell knew his legacy was secure. Sarah possessed the intelligence to expand their empire, the strength to protect it from threats, and the wisdom to understand that some principles couldn't be compromised. As they drove home through the city Mitchell had helped build over 2 decades of honest work, they passed a closed storefront that had once housed Carol's boutique. The space was empty now, its windows covered with newspapers, a monument to the dreams that had died when Carol chose betrayal over loyalty. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Mom had made different choices?" Sarah asked. Mitchell considered the question seriously. "Your mother had everything she could want: a successful husband, a beautiful daughter, financial security, and a respected place in the community. She traded all of that for a few months with a man who was planning to rob us and disappear. Some people are incapable of appreciating what they have until they've lost it. And Derek was a predator who targeted families like ours. His death was inevitable, if not from the stress of owing money to dangerous people, then from eventually threatening the wrong person's child. Men like Derek don't die of old age. Sarah nodded, satisfied with her father's analysis. I'm glad they're both gone from our lives. They chose to be, Mitchell replied. We just made sure their choices had appropriate consequences. That night, Mitchell sat in his study reviewing architectural plans for projects that would reshape the skyline over the next decade. His empire was stronger than ever. His daughter was prepared to expand it beyond anything he'd imagined, and the threats that had once seemed insurmountable had been eliminated permanently. On his desk, in a frame beside Sarah's latest academic achievements, was a photograph from her graduation day. Sarah in her cap and gown, Mitchell in his best suit, both of them smiling with the confidence of people who understood that success required both vision and the strength to protect what mattered most. Some foundations, Mitchell reflected, were built to support structures that would last for centuries. Others were built to ensure that the people who mattered most would never face threats they couldn't overcome. The choice between those two types of foundations always belonged to the people who decided whether to build or destroy. Mitchell Bright had chosen to build, and his foundation would outlast everything else. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Facade. The morning sun cast long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawn of 1247 Maple Drive, where Daniel Morrison stood watching his 17-year-old son Kyle trudge toward the school bus. Something was off. In the sweltering July heat, Kyle wore a long-sleeved hoodie pulled tight around his thin frame, his shoulders hunched as if carrying an invisible weight. Daniel Morrison had built his life on reading people. 23 years as a private military contractor had taught him that survival depended on noticing what others missed. The slight tremor in Kyle's hands, the way he avoided eye contact, the defensive posture, all red flags that Daniel's wife Linda had dismissed with a casual wave. He's just going through a phase, Linda had said that morning, barely looking up from her phone as she sipped her coffee. Her manicured nails tapped rhythmically against the ceramic mug, a habit that had begun to grate on Daniel's nerves over the past 6 months. Daniel's jaw tightened as he watched the bus disappear around the corner. Linda Morrison, once the devoted wife who had waited faithfully through his deployments in Afghanistan and Syria, had become a stranger. The woman who used to greet him with passionate kisses and home-cooked meals now offered distracted pecks on the cheek and takeout containers. At 45, Daniel still maintained the physique and discipline of his military days. His steel-gray eyes missed nothing, and his mind was always calculating, always planning. Those skills had kept him alive in places where mercy was a luxury and hesitation meant death. Now, those same instincts were screaming that something was poisoning his family from within. The Morrison family appeared perfect from the outside, a successful security consultant, his beautiful wife who ran a boutique marketing firm, and their honor roll son headed for an Ivy League college. They lived in Willowbrook's most prestigious neighborhood, drove luxury cars, and attended the right social events. But Daniel knew that facades were often the most dangerous lies. His phone buzzed with a text from his business partner, Trevor Walsh. Client meeting moved to 3 p.m. The Henderson contract needs your touch. Daniel's security consulting firm had grown exponentially since he'd left the military, thanks largely to his reputation for handling delicate situations that required unconventional solutions. But today, Daniel's focus wasn't on corporate espionage or executive protection. Today, his paternal instincts were in overdrive. Kyle had always been open with him. They'd shared everything from baseball stats to college aspirations. This sudden withdrawal coincided perfectly with Linda's own emotional distance, and Daniel didn't believe in coincidences. He walked back into the house, noting how Linda quickly minimized whatever she'd been looking at on her laptop screen. She glanced up with that perfectly practiced smile that had once melted his heart, but now felt calculated. "Don't you have that big client presentation today?" she asked, her tone light, but her eyes not quite meeting his. "Later," Daniel replied, settling into the chair across from her. "I'm worried about Kyle." Linda's laugh sounded forced. "Oh, honey, you're being paranoid. Remember when you thought the neighbors were surveilling us because their landscaper came twice in 1 week?" The deflection was expertly done, but Daniel caught the micro-expression of annoyance that flashed across her face. In hostile territories, he'd learned to trust his gut above all else, and his gut was telling him that his wife was lying. "Maybe," he conceded, standing up. "I'm heading to the office early. See you tonight." Linda's relief was almost palpable. "Okay, sweetie, I have that big campaign launch today, so I might be late." Another lie. Daniel had checked her company's website that morning. No major campaigns were launching. As he grabbed his keys, he made a mental note to have Trevor run a discreet background check on Linda's recent activities. Trust but verify. It had been his motto in the field, and it would serve him well now. As Daniel drove toward his office, he couldn't shake the image of Kyle's fearful eyes. Whatever was happening in his house, whatever had driven his son to hide beneath long sleeves in the summer heat, he would uncover it. And when he did, God help anyone who had hurt his family. The Daniel Morrison who had earned 3 commendations for his work in classified operations wasn't the type of man who forgave easily. He was the type who planned meticulously, struck precisely, and never left loose ends. If someone was threatening his family, they had made a fatal miscalculation about who they were dealing with. Chapter 2. Cracks in the Foundation. 3 days later, Daniel's suspicions crystallized into cold, hard certainty. It started with Kyle's laundry. Daniel had come home early from a client meeting, using his key to enter quietly, an old habit from his tactical days. The house was supposed to be empty. Linda was allegedly at a conference in Portland, and Kyle was at soccer practice. But as Daniel moved through the hallway, he heard the washing machine running. Rounding the corner into the laundry room, Daniel found Kyle frantically scrubbing at a white dress shirt, one of the expensive ones Linda had bought him for formal events. But the shirt wasn't white anymore. Dark red stains spread across the fabric like abstract art, and Kyle's hands were shaking as he worked. "Dad!" Kyle jumped, nearly dropping the shirt. I didn't know you were home." Daniel's trained eyes took in everything. The fresh bruise on Kyle's left temple, barely concealed by carefully arranged hair. The split lip that explained the long sleeves. Kyle was hiding more injuries, and most telling of all, the look of pure terror in his son's eyes. "Kyle," Daniel said quietly, his voice carrying the kind of calm authority that had made enemy combatants surrender without a fight. "What happened?" "Nothing, Dad. I had a nosebleed. You know how they are in this heat." Another lie, but this one broke Daniel's heart. His son was protecting someone, and that someone had hurt him badly enough to leave blood on his clothes. "Son, look at me." Daniel stepped closer, and Kyle instinctively flinched, a reaction that made Daniel's blood run cold. "Who did this to you?" Kyle's composure cracked. "Please, Dad. Please don't ask. It'll only make things worse." "Worse for who?" Kyle's silence was answer enough. Someone had threatened his son into silence, and Daniel's mind was already racing through possibilities. Bullies at school? A teacher with boundary issues? Or something closer to home? "Where's your mother supposed to be right now?" Daniel asked. "Portland. That conference thing." Kyle's response was automatic, rehearsed. Daniel pulled out his phone and showed Kyle the screen. Linda's location, visible through the family tracking app she'd insisted they all use for safety. The dot pulsed steadily from the Riverside Hotel, 15 minutes across town. Kyle's face went ashen. "Dad, please. You don't understand." "I understand plenty." Daniel's voice had taken on the edge that used to make enemy insurgents reconsider their life choices. "Go to your room. Lock the door. Don't come out until I tell you." Dad, no. You can't. Kyle. The single word carried 23 years of command authority. Room. Now. As Kyle hurried upstairs, Daniel's mind shifted into tactical mode. His wife was lying about her location. His son was being hurt by someone who'd threatened him into silence, and all of it was happening under his roof. The same instincts that had kept him alive in Kandahar were now screaming for blood. Daniel walked to his home office, a room Linda never entered because it contained his boring work stuff. Behind a false panel he'd installed himself was a collection of items from his previous career: surveillance equipment, untraceable communication devices, and a few tools that weren't exactly legal in civilian hands. He selected a miniature camera, military grade, undetectable to civilian bug sweepers, and headed to Kyle's room. His son was sitting on his bed, arms wrapped around his knees, looking younger than his 17 years. Kyle, I need to put something in your room. For your protection. Dad, you're scaring me. Good. Someone should be scared right now. And it's not going to be you. Daniel's eyes were cold as winter steel. This camera will record everything. If someone is hurting you, I need evidence. Kyle's protest died when he saw his father's expression. Daniel Morrison, in protective mode, was a force of nature, and Kyle had inherited enough of his father's instincts to recognize when resistance was futile. Daniel positioned the camera with military precision, hidden in Kyle's bookshelf with a clear view of the room and window. The device would upload everything to an encrypted server, accessible only through Daniel's secure network. Dad, Kyle's voice was small. What if the person hurting me is someone you care about? The question hit Daniel like a physical blow. His son's carefully neutral phrasing, the way Kyle couldn't meet his eyes, the timeline of Linda's strange behavior. Suddenly, the pieces began forming a picture that made Daniel's vision narrow with rage. Kyle, Daniel said, his voice deadly calm, if anyone, and I mean anyone, has hurt you, they will answer to me. Blood relation, marriage vows, whatever connection they think protects them, none of that matters. The only thing that matters is that you're my son, and I will burn down the world before I let someone hurt you. Kyle began to cry then, not the tears of a teenager embarrassed by parental concern, but the broken sobs of a child who'd been carrying an unbearable secret. Daniel gathered his son in his arms, noting the way Kyle winced when pressure was applied to his ribs. It's going to be okay, Daniel whispered, though his mind was already cataloging ways to make someone pay. Daddy's going to fix this. That night, Daniel sat in his office, watching the camera feed from Kyle's room on one monitor while tracking Linda's location on another. She was still at the Riverside Hotel, supposedly at a conference that didn't exist. At 11:47 p.m., his phone buzzed with a text from her. Conference running late. Staying overnight. Love you. Daniel stared at the message, then at the hotel's website showing a vacancy rate of only 60%. Whatever Linda was doing, she wasn't doing alone. He opened a secure messaging app and typed a message to Trevor. Need a full surveillance package on Linda Morrison. Real-time location, communications, associates. Highest priority. Trevor's response came within minutes. Jesus, Dan. You sure about this? Never been more sure of anything in my life. As Daniel prepared for what might be the longest night of his life, he made himself a promise. Whatever was happening to his son, whoever was responsible, they had just declared war on the wrong man. Daniel Morrison had ended insurgencies with less motivation than this. Tomorrow, he would begin hunting, and unlike his previous wars, this one was personal. Chapter 3. The night everything changed. The camera had been recording for exactly 18 hours and 37 minutes when Daniel's worst fears materialized on his computer screen. He'd been reviewing the footage frame by frame, looking for any clue about Kyle's injuries, when the timestamp hit 2:14 a.m. Kyle was asleep, buried under blankets despite the summer heat, probably to hide his injuries even from himself. That's when Daniel heard it, the soft click of his front door opening. Someone was in his house. On the camera feed, Daniel watched Kyle stir, but not wake as footsteps approached his room. The door opened slowly, deliberately, and a figure slipped inside. The infrared camera captured everything in stark detail as the intruder moved toward Kyle's bed. Daniel's blood turned to ice water when he recognized the silhouette. Linda. But she wasn't alone. A second figure followed, taller, broader. Male. In the camera's green-tinted display, Daniel watched his wife and a stranger approach his sleeping son. The man's face came in a clear view as he leaned over Kyle's bed. Derek Hoffman, Linda's supposed business partner from her marketing firm. Daniel's hands trembled as he reached for his phone to call 911. But then Derek spoke, his voice clearly audible through the camera's sensitive microphone. "Wake up, kid. Time for your medicine." Kyle stirred, and even through the infrared feed, Daniel could see the terror that immediately flooded his son's face when he saw Derek looming over him. "Please," Kyle whispered. "I told you I wouldn't say anything. Please just leave me alone." Linda moved into frame, and Daniel felt his world shatter as she placed a gentle hand on Kyle's forehead, the same gesture she'd used to comfort their son through childhood fevers and nightmares. "Shoot, baby," she murmured. "You know this is for the best. Derek and I are going to be together, and you're going to help us make that happen. Your father has so much money, and he'd do anything to protect you." "Mom, please," Kyle sobbed. "I'm your son, and you're going to be a very useful son," Derek said, pulling something from his jacket. "Hold still." What happened next would haunt Daniel for the rest of his life. He watched, paralyzed by shock and rage, as the woman he'd loved for 19 years and trusted with his life helped a stranger inject their son with something that made Kyle go limp and compliant. "There we go," Derek said, checking Kyle's pulse. "Just enough to keep him manageable. Now, about those bruises healing too fast." Daniel's military training finally overrode his emotional shock as Derek pulled out what looked like a small baton. This wasn't just abuse. This was systematic torture designed to keep Kyle terrified and dependent. And Linda, his Linda, was not just allowing it, but orchestrating it. He was already moving, grabbing his service weapon from the safe, when Derek struck Kyle across the ribs. Kyle's muffled cry of pain cut through Daniel like a blade, and something fundamental broke inside him. The man who'd spent decades fighting monsters overseas realized the worst monster had been living in his own home. Daniel's tactical training took over as he moved through his house like a ghost. Years of close-quarters combat had taught him to be silent, invisible, lethal. He positioned himself outside Kyle's room, weapon drawn, as Linda and Derek continued their assault on his son. "The beauty of this," Derek was saying, "is that your dad will never suspect your own mother. We'll bleed him dry through sympathy, and by the time he figures it out, we'll be in the Cayman Islands, and you'll be what?" Daniel's voice cut through the darkness like a sword. The room froze. Linda spun around, her face cycling through shock, fear, and something that might have been relief. Derek, however, was reaching for something in his waistband. "I wouldn't," Daniel said, his weapon trained center mass on Derek. "Unless you want to explain to the police why your brains are decorating my son's wall." "Danny," Linda started, her voice taking on that same manipulative sweetness she'd used on Kyle. "You don't understand. This isn't what it looks like. Really." Daniel's voice carried the kind of cold fury that had made enemy commanders surrender entire compounds. "Because it looks like my wife and her lover have been systematically torturing my son to extort money from me. Did I miss something?" Derek's hand moved another inch toward his weapon. It was the last mistake he would ever make. Daniel's military reflexes kicked in, and Derek was on the ground with a dislocated shoulder before he could blink. The gun Derek had been reaching for skittered across the floor as he screamed in pain. "Dad!" Kyle's voice was slurred from whatever they'd injected him with, but the relief was unmistakable. "It's okay, son. Daddy's here." Daniel kept his weapon trained on Linda, who was backing toward the window. "Linda, don't even think about running. You haven't begun to pay for what you've done. You can't prove anything," she hissed, and Daniel saw her clearly for the first time in months, maybe years. The mask was completely off now, revealing something calculating and cruel beneath the perfect facade. "I don't need to prove anything in court," Daniel said quietly. "I have 18 hours of footage of you and your boyfriend torturing my son. That's all the proof I need." Linda's face went white as she realized what he meant. "Danny, please. We can work this out. I'll leave Derek. We can get counseling." Oh, we're way past counseling. Daniel's smile was the kind that had made hardened terrorists reconsider their life choices. Way past. In fact, we're about to enter territory you can't even imagine. He pulled out his phone with his free hand and dialed 911. Police and ambulance to 1247 Maple Drive. I've caught 2 intruders assaulting my son. Danny, no. Linda lunged toward him, but Daniel was ready. A gentle push sent her sprawling next to Derek, who was still writhing in pain. 911. What's your emergency? This is Daniel Morrison. I need police and paramedics. 2 home invaders have been systematically abusing my son. I have them restrained, but the boy needs medical attention. Linda stared at him in horror as she realized what he was doing. To the outside world, she and Derek would be strangers who'd broken into the Morrison home. The security cameras would show them entering illegally. Kyle's injuries would corroborate the story, and Daniel's reputation as a decorated veteran and respected businessman would make his version unquestionable. You can't do this, she whispered. I can do whatever I want, Daniel replied, his voice carrying the promise of something far worse than prison. I'm a decorated war hero who caught strangers torturing his son. Do you really think anyone's going to question my story? As sirens wailed in the distance, Daniel knelt beside Kyle, gently checking his pulse and pupils. The drug was wearing off, and Kyle was becoming more alert. Dad, Kyle's voice was getting stronger. Are you going to be okay? Daniel's heart nearly broke at the question. Even drugged and beaten, his son was worried about him. I'm going to be fine, son. But Linda and Derek. Daniel looked at the 2 people who'd betrayed his family, his eyes promising retribution that would make their worst nightmares seem pleasant. They're going to wish they'd never been born. The war had come home, and Daniel Morrison was done being the victim. Chapter 4. The Anatomy of a Hunter. 3 weeks after the arrests, Daniel Morrison sat in his private office reviewing files that would have impressed his old commanding officers with their thoroughness. The public story was clean. Linda Morrison and Derek Hoffman, co-conspirators in an elaborate scheme to torture Kyle Morrison for ransom money, had been arrested and charged with multiple felonies. The media had painted Daniel as a heroic father, and Kyle was recovering well in trauma counseling. But the real story was just beginning. Daniel had spent those 3 weeks doing what he did best, gathering intelligence and building a strategy. The folder in front of him contained the complete life histories of Linda Morrison and Derek Hoffman, compiled with the help of Trevor Walsh and their extensive network of former military contractors who now worked in the shadows of the private sector. Linda Elizabeth Morrison, née Patterson, age 41, born in Portland to middle-class parents who declared bankruptcy when she was 16. First arrest at 17 for credit card fraud. Charges dropped due to lack of evidence. Married Daniel when she was 22 and he was 26, right before his 3rd deployment to Afghanistan. What Daniel found most interesting were the gaps in her employment history and the financial records Trevor had obtained through less than legal means. For the past 2 years, Linda had been siphoning money from their joint accounts, small amounts, nothing that would trigger automatic alerts, but totaling nearly $80,000. Derek Hoffman's file was even more revealing. 38 years old, divorced twice, both ex-wives had filed restraining orders citing escalating emotional and physical abuse. He'd met Linda at a business conference 18 months ago, around the same time her personality had begun to change. But the most damning information came from Derek's financial records. He owed nearly $300,000 to some very unpleasant people, the kind who collected debts with baseball bats and didn't accept payment plans. The kind Daniel had dealt with in darker corners of the world. Trevor Walsh knocked on the office door and entered without waiting for permission, a privilege earned through 15 years of partnership and shared combat experience. At 42, Trevor maintained the lean build and alert eyes of his Special Forces days, though his expertise now lay in corporate espionage and problem resolution. The lawyers called, Trevor said, settling into the chair across from Daniel's desk. Linda's attorney is pushing for a plea deal. Voluntary manslaughter on the torture charges, 20 years with parole possibility in 12. Daniel didn't look up from the files. Absolutely not. Dan, 20 years is not enough. Daniel's voice carried the flat finality of a man stating natural law. 20 years means she gets out while Kyle's still young enough to be manipulated. 20 years means that she might convince some bleeding heart parole board that she's reformed. 20 years means she lives to potentially hurt him again. Trevor had seen Daniel in this mode before, during the Kandahar incident when a local commander had betrayed their position, resulting in the deaths of 3 Marines. That commander had been found weeks later, dead from what appeared to be internal hemorrhaging, though no cause was ever determined. What about Derek? Trevor asked carefully. Derek owes money to the Kozlov organization, Daniel said, finally looking up. 300 grand plus interest. I've already made contact with their collection specialist. Trevor felt a chill. The Kozlov family ran most of the underground financing on the West Coast, and their collection methods were legendary for creativity and permanence. Dan, you can't. I can't what? Daniel's eyes were the cold gray of winter steel. I can't arrange for a known extortionist to face the consequences of his other poor choices. Derek borrowed money from very bad people. If those very bad people happen to learn where he's being held pending trial, well, that's just unfortunate timing. Daniel stood and walked to the window overlooking the city. Kyle hasn't slept through the night since this started. He flinches when I touch him. My 17-year-old son, who used to tell me everything, now checks corners for threats and jumps at sudden noises. They broke something in him, Trevor. The therapist said he'll recover. But recovery and justice aren't the same thing. Daniel turned back to his partner. I need you to understand something. The Daniel Morrison who married Linda and raised Kyle, that man was willing to forgive, to seek help, to believe in second chances. That man died the night I watched my wife inject my son with drugs so her boyfriend could beat him. Trevor had seen Daniel kill people with his bare hands, had watched him plan operations that resulted in the elimination of entire terrorist cells. But the man standing before him now was something different, something colder and more dangerous than the soldier he'd known. What are you going to do? Daniel returned to his desk and opened another file, this one thicker than the others. Linda and Derek thought they were manipulating a suburban father and businessman. They didn't realize they were targeting someone who spent 23 years in the darkest corners of the world, learning how to hunt monsters. The file contained floor plans, guard schedules, inmate rosters, and detailed psychological profiles. Daniel had been busy during Kyle's recovery. I'm going to give them what they deserve, Daniel continued. Derek will face his creditors. All I have to do is ensure the right information reaches the right people. His death will be slow and educational. And Linda, Daniel's smile was the kind that had made enemy commanders surrender without firing a shot. Linda is going to learn that some betrayals carry a lifetime warranty. She wanted my money so badly, she's going to get all of it. Every penny she's legally entitled to as my wife. Trevor didn't understand. That doesn't sound like revenge. Patience, Daniel said, pulling out a final document. Linda's about to inherit a very expensive problem. You see, I've been conducting some business transactions over the past few weeks. Leveraging assets, making investments, restructuring debt. Trevor scanned the document and felt his blood run cold. Jesus Christ, Dan. You transferred everything. Every asset, every account, every investment. As of this morning, Linda Morrison is the sole owner of Morrison Security Consulting and all associated holdings. Daniel's expression was perfectly calm. She's also the sole inheritor of our debt obligations. What debt obligations? Daniel's smile widened. Well, it seems I've developed quite a gambling problem over the past few months. Terrible addiction, really. Lost everything to some very unsavory characters. The kind who don't distinguish between husbands and wives when it comes to collection. Trevor stared at the papers in horror. Daniel had systematically destroyed his own financial empire and transferred the wreckage to Linda. She would inherit not wealth, but a death sentence from the same people Derek owed money to. The beauty of it, Daniel continued, is that it's all completely legal. Spousal property laws are very clear about shared debt responsibility. Even if she's in prison, they'll find her. Dan, this is justice. Daniel's voice cut through Trevor's objections like a blade. They torture my son for money. Now they'll both die for it. Derek quickly, Linda slowly, over many years of looking over her shoulder, wondering when her creditors will come calling. Trevor had followed Daniel into some of the darkest operations imaginable, but this level of methodical destruction was beyond anything he'd witnessed. What about Kyle? What about your life? Daniel picked up a framed photo of Kyle from his desk, taken last year's baseball game, when the boy's biggest worry was maintaining his batting average. My old life into the night. I watched my wife help a stranger torture my son. This new life has only one purpose: making sure that everyone who hurt Kyle pays the full price. Daniel's eyes met Trevor's. The question is whether you're with me or not. Trevor looked at his oldest friend, recognizing the man who'd walked into enemy compounds alone and emerged victorious. Daniel Morrison was no longer playing by civilian rules, and God help anyone who stood in his way. What do you need me to do? Chapter 5. Setting the Board. The Oregon State Penitentiary's visiting room hummed with the low murmur of conversations between inmates and their families. Daniel Morrison sat across from Derek Hoffman, separated by reinforced glass and connected by a phone that recorded every word. Derek looked terrible. 3 weeks in Gen Pop had left him thinner, jumpier, and sporting a collection of bruises that spoke to his unpopularity among his fellow inmates. "You came?" Derek said, his voice crackling through the phone. "I wasn't sure you would." Daniel's expression was perfectly neutral, the face he'd worn during prisoner interrogations in hostile territory. "I wanted to see how you were adjusting to your new accommodations." Derek's laugh was bitter. "Your boy Kyle really did a number on me, didn't he? Telling everyone I was some kind of child molester. Half the guys in here want to kill me, and the other half want to make me their girlfriend. Kyle told the truth about what you did to him. Look, Morrison, I never touched your kid like that. Yeah, Linda and I roughed him up a little, but it wasn't sexual. We just needed him scared so you'd pay up." Daniel leaned back in his chair, studying Derek with the same intensity he'd once used to evaluate enemy combatants. "You're right. It wasn't sexual. It was financial. You tortured my son for money. You needed to pay off Alexei Kozlov." Daniel's words hit Derek like a physical blow. $300,000 plus interest. Currently sitting at around $450, I'd estimate. Derek's face went white. "How do you know about that?" "I know a lot of things, Derek. For instance, I know that Alexei is very interested in your current location. Apparently, he's been looking for you." The phone slipped from Derek's nerveless fingers, and Daniel watched with satisfaction as panic flooded his prisoner's eyes. Derek recovered the handset, his voice now a desperate whisper. "You didn't tell him where I am. Please tell me you didn't." "I didn't have to." Daniel's smile was cold as Arctic wind. "Alexei has contacts everywhere, including inside this facility. Prison guards don't make much money, Derek. They're surprisingly open to supplemental income." Derek looked around the visiting room frantically, as if expecting Russian enforcers to materialize from the walls. "Morrison, please. I know I hurt your son, but you can't do this. Alexei will. Alexei will do what he does to people who owe him money and disappear. Nothing I can control or prevent." Daniel leaned forward. "But I might be able to help you." "Ow!" "There's a witness protection program for federal informants. If you were to provide information about a certain conspiracy to commit extortion and child abuse, if you were to implicate certain co-conspirators and provide evidence of their planning and participation." Daniel let the implication hang in the air. Derek's desperation was almost palpable. "You want me to testify against Linda? I want you to tell the truth about whose idea this was. I want you to explain how she recruited you, how she provided inside information about our family, how she helped plan Kyle's abuse." Daniel's voice remained perfectly calm. "I want the prosecutor to understand that Linda Morrison was the architect of this conspiracy. She was," Derek said quickly. "It was all her idea. She came to me, said her husband was loaded and stupid, said we could scare the kid into getting money. She knew his schedule, knew when you'd be home, knew everything. And in exchange for your complete cooperation, I'll make sure certain information doesn't reach certain people." Derek grabbed the phone with both hands. "Yes. God, yes. Whatever you want, I'll say. Just keep Kozlov away from me." Daniel stood, preparing to leave. "Oh, Derek? One more thing. If you ever change your mind about cooperating, if you ever think about recanting your testimony or claiming you were coerced. Daniel's smile disappeared entirely. Well, Alexei Kozlov will be the least of your problems. Derek was still promising cooperation when Daniel walked away. 45 minutes later, Daniel sat in a different visiting room, facing his wife of 19 years. Linda looked better than Derek. The women's facility was cleaner, safer, and her attorney had arranged for her to be housed in protective custody. She'd even managed to maintain some of her appearance, though the orange jumpsuit did nothing for her complexion. "Danny," she said as soon as she picked up the phone. "Thank God you're here. My lawyer says Derek is going to testify against me. Say this was all my idea. You have to help me." Daniel studied the woman he'd once loved enough to marry, the mother of his son, the person he'd trusted with his life and future. "Why would I help you?" Linda's perfectly rehearsed facade cracked slightly. "Because I'm your wife. Because we have history. Because—" She leaned forward, deploying the same manipulative charm she'd used on Kyle. "Because you love me." "I did love you," Daniel agreed. Past tense. "The woman I loved died the night I watched her inject my son with drugs." "Danny, please. You don't understand the pressure I was under. Derek threatened me, said he'd hurt Kyle if I didn't cooperate. I was protecting our son." The lie was so audacious, so completely contrary to the evidence, that Daniel almost admired her commitment to the performance. "Linda, I have 18 hours of video showing you actively participating in Kyle's torture. There's no coercion defense that will work here." Linda's mask slipped further, revealing glimpses of the calculating woman underneath. "Fine. Yes, I helped. But you drove me to it, Danny. 20 years of being married to a ghost. 20 years of playing second fiddle to your precious military career and your business. I deserved better. You deserved better." Daniel repeated the words thoughtfully. "So you decided to torture our son for money." "I decided to take what should have been mine anyway. You make millions from that security company, and what do I get? An allowance? Permission to buy groceries." Daniel pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. "You're absolutely right. You deserve everything that's coming to you." Linda opened the folder, her expression shifting from confusion to horror as she read the documents inside. "Congratulations," Daniel said. "As of this morning, you are the sole owner of Morrison Security Consulting. Every asset, every account, every investment. It's all yours now. This is everything. Your entire company." "Our entire company," Daniel corrected. "Community property laws are very clear. What's mine is yours, especially the debts." Linda's face went white as she reached the final pages. "What debts?" "Well, it seems I developed quite a gambling problem over the past few months. Poker, sports betting, some very high-stakes underground games. Lost everything to some fairly unpleasant people." Linda stared at the numbers, her hand trembling. "This says you owe $12 million. We owe $12 million. Community property, remember? And our creditors are very eager to collect." Daniel leaned back in his chair. "I'm told the Kozlov organization is particularly creative in their collection methods. You can't do this. This is fraud. This is completely legal. I have witnesses' documentation, even some very convincing therapy records about my gambling addiction and subsequent financial ruin." Daniel's smile was cold as winter. "My attorney assures me it will all hold up in court." Linda was hyperventilating now, the full scope of her situation becoming clear. "They'll kill me. Probably. Though I'm told Alexei Kozlov prefers to make examples of people who owe him money. The deaths tend to be educational." "Danny, please. I'm sorry. I'll make this right. You're going to make this right by accepting responsibility for your choices. Derek is going to testify that this conspiracy was your idea, that you recruited him, that you provided the inside information. In exchange, he gets witness protection. And what do I get?" Daniel stood to leave. "You get exactly what you wanted, Linda. All of my money." His smile was the last thing she saw before he hung up the phone. Every bloody penny of it. As Daniel walked out of the prison, he felt a satisfaction deeper than anything he'd experienced in combat. Linda and Derek had thought they were playing against a suburban businessman. They'd never realized they were facing someone who'd spent decades learning how to destroy his enemies completely and permanently. The war was almost over, and Daniel Morrison always won his wars. Chapter 6: The Price of Betrayal. Kyle Morrison stood at his bedroom window, watching his father tend to the garden below. 3 months had passed since the arrests, and while Kyle's physical injuries had healed, the deeper wounds were taking longer to close. Dr. Patricia Wells, his trauma counselor, said healing wasn't linear. Some days were better than others. Today was a better day. Kyle. Daniel's voice came from downstairs. Your Uncle Trevor's here. Kyle hurried downstairs, genuinely excited to see Trevor Walsh. Unlike the parade of attorneys, social workers, and therapists who'd invaded their home recently, Trevor felt normal, a reminder of the life they'd had before everything fell apart. Hey, kid, Trevor said, pulling Kyle into a careful hug. Trevor had been the one to explain to Kyle that men who'd been through trauma sometimes needed extra space, and Kyle appreciated that Trevor remembered. How are you holding up? Trevor asked as they settled in the living room. Better, Kyle said honestly. The nightmares are getting less frequent. And Dad's been amazing. Trevor glanced at Daniel, noting the changes in his old friend. Daniel looked healthier than he had in months. The constant tension that had marked his features during the marriage was gone, replaced by the focused calm of a man with a clear mission. Your father called me over to discuss some business matters, Trevor said. But first, I wanted to talk to you about something. Kyle tensed slightly. What kind of something? College, Daniel said, settling into his chair. Your acceptance to Stanford still stands, but given everything that's happened, we wanted to make sure that's still what you want. Kyle blinked in surprise. With everything else going on, he'd almost forgotten about college applications. Yes. I still want to go. I think maybe you need to get away from here for a while. That's what we thought, Trevor said, which is why your dad and I have been making some arrangements. Daniel pulled out a folder, thinner than the ones Kyle had seen him carrying lately, but somehow more significant. Trevor's son Marcus is a sophomore at Stanford. He's agreed to be your roommate and, well, let's call him your unofficial security. Security? Marcus isn't just Trevor's son, Daniel explained. He's also trained in personal protection, military family tradition. Think of him as a very well-educated bodyguard who happens to be studying computer science. Kyle felt a flutter of anxiety. Do I need a bodyguard? I thought Linda and Derek were in prison. Trevor and Daniel exchanged a look that Kyle had learned to recognize, the look adults shared when they were deciding how much truth a teenager could handle. Kyle, Daniel said carefully, there are some complications with Linda and Derek's cases. We want to make sure you're protected while those complications get sorted out. What kind of complications? Another look between the adults. Trevor cleared his throat. Derek is cooperating with prosecutors, providing information about the conspiracy. His testimony is going to put Linda away for a very long time. That's good, right? Yes and no, Daniel said. Derek's cooperation has revealed some things about Linda that we didn't know before. She was involved with some very dangerous people, Kyle. People who might see you as a loose end. Kyle felt the familiar tightness in his chest that Dr. Wells said was anxiety manifesting as physical symptoms. So, I can't have a normal life? I can't just go to college and be a regular kid? Daniel was beside Kyle in an instant, his hand gentle on his son's shoulder. You can have whatever life you want, son, but we're going to make sure it's a safe life. Marcus is a good kid, Trevor added. You'll like him. And Stanford has excellent security. Between Marcus and the campus police, you'll be safer there than anywhere else. Kyle nodded, though part of him wondered if he'd ever feel truly safe again. When do I leave? 2 weeks, Daniel said. That should give us time to finalize some business matters here. Kyle didn't miss the euphemism. His father had been finalizing business matters for months now, and Kyle had learned not to ask too many questions about what that meant. Dad, Kyle's voice was quiet. Are you going to be okay? After I leave for college. Daniel's expression softened. I'm going to be fine, Kyle. Better than fine. For the first time in years, I know exactly what I need to do. After Trevor left, Kyle found his father in the home office, surrounded by files and legal documents. Daniel looked up as Kyle knocked on the doorframe. "Come in, son." Kyle settled in the chair across from Daniel's desk, the same chair where he'd done homework for years while his father worked on boring business stuff. Now, Kyle understood that his father's work was far from boring. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Always." "What's really going to happen to Linda and Derek?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment, studying his son's face. Kyle had grown up a lot in the past few months. The boy who'd once worried about baseball games and algebra tests was now asking adult questions about justice and consequences. "What do you want to happen to them?" Daniel asked. Kyle thought carefully before answering. "I want them to never be able to hurt anyone else. I want Derek to understand what it feels like to be scared and helpless. And Linda." Kyle's voice hardened in a way that reminded Daniel powerfully of himself. "Linda was supposed to protect me. She was my mother, and she chose to hurt me instead. I want her to understand what that betrayal feels like." Daniel felt a surge of pride and concern in equal measure. Kyle was his son in every way that mattered, including the capacity for righteous anger and strategic thinking. "They will," Daniel said simply. "They're going to understand exactly what they put you through. Are you going to get in trouble for whatever you're planning?" Daniel smiled, the first genuinely happy expression Kyle had seen on his father's face in months. "No, son, I'm not going to get in trouble. What I'm doing is perfectly legal, carefully planned, and completely justified." "Good," Kyle said, standing to leave. "Because I need you to be okay. I can't lose you too." The simple statement hit Daniel harder than any physical blow. Kyle had lost his mother, not to death, but to something worse: betrayal. Linda Morrison was still alive, but the woman Kyle had called Mom was gone forever, revealed to be a monster wearing a familiar face. "You won't lose me," Daniel promised. "I'll always be here for you, Kyle, no matter what." As Kyle headed upstairs to pack for college, Daniel returned his files. The end game was approaching, and soon Linda and Derek would understand the full price of their betrayal. In 2 weeks, Kyle would be safe at Stanford under Marcus Walsh's protection. Derek would face his creditors in prison, where Daniel's information network had ensured that Alexei Kozlov's people knew exactly which cell block he called home. And Linda? Linda would discover that community property laws worked both ways. She'd wanted Daniel's money, and she was going to get all of it, along with every debt, every obligation, and every enemy that came with it. Daniel Morrison had spent his military career learning that some enemies couldn't be reasoned with, negotiated with, or reformed. They could only be destroyed completely and permanently. Soon, his family would be safe. Kyle would be starting his new life, and the people who'd hurt his son would face justice of a kind that no court could deliver. The war was almost over, and Daniel Morrison always finished what he started. Chapter 7: Justice Delivered. The first domino fell on a Tuesday morning at 3:47 a.m. Derek Hoffman's screams echoed through cell Block D of the Oregon State Penitentiary, where Alexei Kozlov's collection specialist had finally come calling. The man who'd tortured Kyle Morrison for money learned what real torture felt like when administered by a professional who'd honed his craft in the darker corners of the world. Daniel Morrison received the news over breakfast, delivered via an encrypted message from a contact he'd cultivated during his military days. The message was brief: package delivered. Client satisfied with product quality. "Good news?" Kyle asked, looking up from his scrambled eggs. "Derek Hoffman won't be testifying after all," Daniel said, setting down his phone. Apparently, he had an accident in prison. Kyle's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "What kind of accident?" "The kind that happens when you owe money to very bad people." Daniel's tone was conversational, as if discussing the weather. "I'm told it was quite educational for the other inmates." Kyle nodded and returned to his breakfast. Dr. Wells would probably say it was unhealthy for a 17-year-old to feel satisfaction at another person's death, but Kyle had stopped caring about psychological norms months ago. Derek Hoffman had helped torture him for money. Derek Hoffman was dead. The universe felt more balanced. "What about Linda?" Kyle asked. "Linda's situation is more complex. But don't worry, justice is coming for her too." 3 days later, Kyle left for Stanford with a full scholarship, a new identity courtesy of his father's connections, and the protection of Marcus Walsh, Trevor's son, who happened to be built like a linebacker and trained in close protection techniques. With Kyle safely away, Daniel Morrison was free to complete his work. Linda Morrison's legal troubles had multiplied exponentially since Derek's death. Without his testimony, the prosecution's case for conspiracy had weakened, but other evidence had emerged. Evidence that painted Linda as the mastermind of an elaborate extortion scheme targeting her own family. What Linda didn't know was that every piece of damning evidence had been carefully crafted and planted by Daniel, using skills he'd learned during Black Ops missions where the truth was whatever served the mission best. Financial records showed Linda had been planning the scheme for over a year. Communication intercepts revealed her discussing Kyle's vulnerabilities with unknown conspirators. Psychological evaluations suggested a pattern of narcissistic behavior and exploitation. The case was airtight, and Linda Morrison was looking at life in prison without parole. But Daniel wasn't finished. On a cold morning in November, two men in expensive suits visited Linda in her jail cell. They introduced themselves as representatives of Alexei Kozlov's financial organization and explained that her husband's gambling debts were now her responsibility under Oregon's community property laws. Mrs. Morrison, the taller one, said, his accent marking him as Eastern European, "Your husband owes our organization $12 million, plus interest. As his wife, you are equally liable for this debt." Linda's attorney had prepared her for this possibility, but the reality was still devastating. "I don't have $12 million. We understand. This is why we offer payment plans." The contract they presented was written in legal language that obscured its true meaning, but the essence was simple. Linda Morrison would work off her debt to the Kozlov organization. The work would be dangerous, illegal, and likely to result in her death within 2 years. "Of course," the shorter man added, "if you prefer, we can arrange for immediate payment of the full amount. We have associates in this facility who would be happy to assist with collection." Linda signed a contract with shaking hands. What Linda didn't know was that the two men weren't actually from the Kozlov organization. They were former intelligence operatives whom Daniel had hired to play a role. The contract wasn't legally binding, and the debt wasn't real. But the psychological torture was very real indeed. For 3 months, Linda lived in constant fear, expecting each day to bring either a work assignment that would kill her or a visit from enforcers who would collect the debt through violence. She stopped eating, stopped sleeping, and began showing signs of severe psychological breakdown. Her attorney filed motion after motion for better protection, for transfer to federal custody, for anything that might save his client from the mysterious creditors who seemed to have unlimited reach into the prison system. It was during this period of maximum psychological pressure that Daniel played his final card. He visited Linda on a gray February morning, 6 months after Derek's death and 3 months after Kyle had started his new life at Stanford. Linda looked terrible, thin, hollow-eyed, and jumping at every shadow. "Hello, Linda." Linda picked up the prison phone with trembling hands. "Danny, thank God. You have to help me. These people, Kozlov's people, they're going to kill me. They say you owe them money, but I know you would never." "I never gambled a penny," Daniel said quietly. Linda's words died in her throat. "What? I never gambled. Never owed money to Alexei Kozlov. Never had any debt at all." Daniel's voice was perfectly calm. "I made all up." Linda stared at him through the reinforced glass, her mind struggling to process what she was hearing. The gambling records, the debt documents, the financial transactions, all fiction. Very convincing fiction, created by people who specialize in making lies look like truth. But the men who came to see me, actors. Very good ones, but actors nonetheless. Former CIA operatives who know how to play a role convincingly. Linda's face cycled through confusion, hope, and finally dawning horror as she understood what Daniel was telling her. "You orchestrated all of this. Every detail. Derek's death was real. I simply made sure the right information reached the right people. But your debt to the Kozlov organization, your impending execution, the mysterious enforcers who've been terrorizing you for months." Daniel smiled coldly. "All theater, Linda. All designed to give you a taste of the fear and helplessness you inflicted on our son." Linda was hyperventilating now. "You can't do this. This is psychological torture. This is justice. Daniel's voice cut through her protests like a blade. You tortured Kyle for money. I tortured you for justice. The only difference is that Kyle was innocent, and you deserve everything you've gotten. I'm still going to prison for life. Isn't that enough? Daniel leaned forward, his eyes showing not even a trace of mercy. Linda, you injected my son with drugs so another man could beat him. You looked him in the eyes while he begged for mercy and chose to hurt him anyway. You betrayed the most fundamental trust a child can have in a parent. I'm sorry. God, Danny, I'm so sorry. No, you're not. You're sorry you got caught. You're sorry you're facing consequences. But you're not sorry for what you did to Kyle. Daniel stood to leave. Prison is too good for you, Linda. But it'll have to do. Wait. Linda pressed her hand against the glass. What about the debt? What about Kozlov's people? Daniel turned back with a smile that made Linda's blood freeze. Oh, that's the beautiful part. While you've been worrying about fictional debt collectors, I've been making some real arrangements. You see, your reputation in here has taken quite a beating. Word has spread that you're a child abuser, someone who tortured her own son for money. Linda's face went white. In prison hierarchies, child abusers ranked somewhere below informants and slightly above mass murderers of children. I'm told the other inmates have been very interested in meeting you once you're transferred to general population. Apparently, several of them are mothers who don't appreciate what you did to Kyle. They'll kill me. Probably. Though I hear prison justice can be quite creative. Daniel's smile was the last thing Linda saw before he hung up the phone and walked away. As Daniel left the prison, he felt a satisfaction deeper than anything he'd experienced in his military career. Linda Morrison would spend the rest of her life, however long that might be, understanding exactly what it felt like to be helpless, terrified, and betrayed by people who were supposed to protect her. The war was over. Daniel Morrison had won completely and permanently. Kyle was safe, starting a new life under a new identity with the best protection Daniel could provide. Derek was dead, having learned the price of hurting Daniel's family. And Linda would face justice every day for the rest of her life. Some enemies could be forgiven. Some mistakes could be overlooked. But not this. Never this. Daniel Morrison drove home to a house that was finally free of monsters, finally safe for the family he had left. He'd lost a wife and gained a clear conscience. It was the best trade he'd ever made. Chapter 8. The Reckoning. Kyle Morrison's voice crackled through the encrypted satellite phone as Daniel walked through his empty house. It was midnight on the West Coast, but Kyle's voice was bright with excitement. Dad, you should see this place. Marcus and I just finished our midterms, and I think I aced advanced calculus. Professor Johnson said my proof methodology was graduate-level work. Daniel smiled as he settled into his home office chair. That's my boy. Your mother always said you got your analytical mind from me. There was a brief pause. Kyle still struggled with references to Linda, even positive ones. Yeah, well, I got the good parts from you and left the bad parts behind. How are you sleeping? Better. The nightmares are mostly gone now. Dr. Martinez, she's the counselor here, says that physical distance from trauma sites can accelerate psychological healing. Kyle's voice grew more serious. How are you doing, Dad? Really? Daniel looked around his office, which had been transformed into a command center over the past 8 months. Maps, photographs, legal documents, and surveillance reports covered every surface. The wall-mounted monitors displayed real-time feeds from Linda's prison, financial tracking data, and communication intercept from associates of various criminal organizations. I'm doing well, son. Very well. Have you heard anything about the trial? Daniel's trial for Linda had concluded 2 weeks earlier. The evidence against her had been overwhelming. Financial records, communication intercepts, witness testimony, and psychological evaluations all painting her as a calculating sociopath who'd tortured her own child for money. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. She was sentenced last week, Daniel said. Life without parole. She'll never hurt anyone again. Kyle was quiet for a long moment. Good. I know Dr. Martinez says I should feel conflicted about wishing bad things on my biological mother, but I don't. I'm glad she's going to pay for what she did. She's not your mother, Kyle. A mother protects her children. Linda was just a woman who gave birth to you. Daniel's voice carried the flat certainty of a man stating natural law. Family is about love and loyalty and protection. Biology is just an accident. I love you, Dad. I love you too, son. More than anything in this world. After Kyle hung up, Daniel turned his attention to the monitors displaying Linda's current situation. She'd been transferred to general population 3 days ago, and the results had been educational. Linda Morrison, formerly the sophisticated marketing executive who'd thrown charity galas and managed million-dollar campaigns, was now inmate number 47381 at Oregon Women's Correctional Center. Her cell was 6 feet by 8 feet, containing a metal cot, a toilet, and a small shelf for personal belongings. She had no personal belongings. The other inmates had made their feelings about child abusers very clear. Linda's commissary money disappeared within hours of being deposited. Her meals were accidentally knocked to the floor. Her cell was randomly searched and vandalized daily by guards who'd heard about her crimes. But the real punishment was psychological. Daniel had spent months carefully crafting Linda's reputation within the prison system. Through a network of former military contractors who now worked in private security, he'd ensured that every guard, every administrator, and every influential inmate knew exactly what Linda Morrison had done to her son. The story had grown in the telling, as prison stories do. By the time Linda arrived at OWCC, she was known as the monster who'd sold her own child to sexual predators for drug money. The truth was bad enough, but the enhanced version guaranteed that Linda would never know a moment's peace. Daniel's phone buzzed with an encrypted message from his contact inside the prison. Subject experiencing severe psychological distress. Panic attacks increasing. Medical isolation requested, but denied due to overcrowding. Daniel typed back, understood. Continue monitoring. The beautiful irony was that everything happening to Linda was completely legal and entirely natural. Daniel hadn't bribed guards or hired inmates to assault her. He'd simply ensured that the truth about her crimes was widely known, and the prison ecosystem had responded predictably. Child abusers didn't fare well in women's prisons, especially when their victims were their own children. The other inmates, many of whom were mothers separated from their own kids, viewed Linda as the worst kind of monster. And they expressed their disapproval through 1,000 small cruelties that would break her mind long before they touched her body. Trevor Walsh knocked on Daniel's office door and entered without waiting for permission, a habit that had carried over from their military days. He looked around the command center with the expression of a man who'd seen his share of classified operations, but was still impressed by the scope of Daniel's surveillance network. Impressive setup, Trevor said, settling into the chair across from Daniel's desk. Though I have to ask, when does this end? Daniel looked at his oldest friend and partner. When Linda Morrison dies. Naturally, of course. I'm not going to have her killed. That would be too quick, too merciful. But when she finally succumbs to the stress, the fear, the complete hopelessness of her situation, then it ends. And Derek ended months ago. Daniel's smile was cold as winter steel. I'm told his death was quite instructive for the other inmates. Amazing how quickly word spreads about the consequences of hurting children. Trevor studied the monitors showing various angles of Linda's prison activities. She was currently in her cell, sitting on her bunk and staring at the wall with the vacant expression of someone whose mind was beginning to fracture. Dan, you've destroyed them both completely. Your son is safe, your enemies are suffering, and you've emerged from this stronger than ever. Maybe it's time to think about moving forward. Daniel turned to face Trevor directly. Kyle is safe for now, but Linda has friends, associates, people who might someday think they can use my son to get leverage over me. Derek had criminal contacts who might view Kyle as an asset or a threat. The network that enabled their crimes against my family is still out there. So what are you planning? Daniel pulled out a thick folder, the culmination of 8 months of investigation and planning. I'm planning to end this permanently. Every person who knew about Linda and Derek's scheme and did nothing. Every criminal contact who might someday threaten Kyle. Every loose thread that could unravel into future danger. Trevor opened the folder and felt his blood run cold. The target list contained 47 names, complete with addresses, financial records, family information, and detailed vulnerability assessments. Former associates of Derek's from his criminal activities. Business contacts of Linda's who'd suspected something was wrong, but chose to look the other way. Extended family members who'd known about Kyle's abuse, but failed to report it. Jesus Christ, Dan. This is a hit list. This is a completion list, Daniel corrected. These people enabled what happened to Kyle through action or inaction. They represent ongoing threats to my son's safety and my family's security. They need to be addressed. Trevor looked at his friend and recognized the man who'd planned operations that resulted in the elimination of entire terrorist networks. Daniel Morrison, in full tactical mode, was a force of nature, and when he decided that someone was a threat, that someone tended to stop being a problem very quickly. Ow! Daniel's smile was the kind that had made enemy commanders surrender without firing a shot. Some will face financial ruin. Amazing how quickly criminal enterprises collapse when the right information reaches law enforcement. Some will face professional destruction. Turns out that harboring knowledge of child abuse can end careers very abruptly. Some will face personal consequences. Criminal associates have such dangerous lifestyles. And the others? The others will simply disappear from Kyle's life permanently. New identities, new locations, new circumstances that make any future contact impossible. Trevor closed the folder, understanding that he was looking at the final phase of Daniel Morrison's war against everyone who'd threatened his family. It was comprehensive, methodical, and absolutely ruthless. What do you need from me? Daniel leaned back in his chair, studying his oldest friend. I need you to understand that this isn't revenge anymore. This is threat elimination. Kyle is starting a new life, and I'm going to make sure that no ghost from his past can ever hurt him again. And after, when the list is complete, Daniel turned to look at a framed photo on his desk. Kyle in his Stanford sweatshirt, smiling genuinely for the first time since the nightmare began. After, I'm going to be the father Kyle deserves. I'm going to watch him graduate, maybe walk him down the aisle someday, teach his children how to throw a baseball. Daniel's voice softened slightly. I'm going to have the life Linda and Derek tried to destroy. Trevor nodded, understanding that he was witnessing the final evolution of Daniel Morrison from soldier to protector to something altogether more dangerous. A father who would burn down the world to keep his child safe. When do we start? Daniel smiled, and Trevor felt a familiar thrill of anticipation. They'd fought wars together, planned impossible missions, and emerged victorious from situations that should have killed them. This would be their final campaign, and like all of Daniel Morrison's wars, it would end with total victory. We start tonight. Chapter 9, The End of War. 6 months later, Daniel Morrison stood in Stanford University's main quadrangle, watching his son graduate with highest honors in mathematics and computer science. Kyle walked across the stage with confidence in his step and genuine joy on his face. The first time Daniel had seen that particular expression since before the nightmare began. Dr. Patricia Wells, Kyle's original trauma counselor, had called Kyle's recovery remarkable and a testament to resilience and strong family support. What she didn't know was that Kyle's healing had been accelerated by the knowledge that every threat to his safety had been systematically eliminated. The completion list had taken 6 months to work through, but Daniel's network of former military contractors and intelligence operatives had proven remarkably efficient. Of the 47 names on the original target list, 31 had been arrested on various charges, 8 had suffered professional or financial ruin, 5 had relocated to different countries under circumstances that made return inadvisable, and 3 had died in accidents that were tragic but unsuspicious. Derek Hoffman's criminal associates had been particularly easy to deal with. A few well-placed tips to law enforcement had resulted in the dismantling of an entire money laundering operation. Linda's business contacts who'd suspected abuse but stayed silent had found their careers ended by mysteriously leaked information about their complicity. The network was broken, scattered, and no longer capable of threatening Kyle's future. Dad! Kyle's voice cut through Daniel's thoughts as his son approached with his diploma and a young woman Daniel hadn't met before. Kyle! Daniel pulled his son into a fierce hug. I'm so proud of you. Dad, I want you to meet Sarah-chan. She's my girlfriend. Sarah was petite, Asian American, with intelligent eyes and a firm handshake that spoke to confidence and strength. Daniel liked her immediately. Mr. Morrison, Kyle's told me so much about you. Thank you for everything you've done for him. Daniel glanced at Kyle, wondering how much Sarah knew about their family's history. Kyle seemed to read his mind. Sarah knows everything, Dad. About Linda, about Derek, about why I needed a new identity. Kyle's voice was steady. She's studying criminology, actually, wants to help kids who've been through what I went through. Daniel felt a surge of pride and approval. Kyle had chosen well, a partner who understood trauma and was dedicated to helping others heal from it. Sarah, it's wonderful to meet you. Kyle's judgment has always been excellent. As they walked across campus, Kyle filled Daniel in on his plans. Graduate school at MIT, a thesis on cryptographic security systems, and a long-term goal of working with law enforcement to develop better tools for protecting children from online predators. I want to make sure other kids don't go through what I did, Kyle explained. And if they do, I want to help catch the people who hurt them. Daniel smiled, recognizing himself in his son's determination to protect others. That sounds like meaningful work. Speaking of work, Kyle said, what are you going to do now? I mean, with me in graduate school and all your business matters resolved? Daniel had been thinking about that question for weeks. Morrison Security Consulting continued to operate under Trevor's management, handling corporate protection and consulting contracts. But Daniel's personal mission was complete. Kyle was safe, educated, and ready to build his own life. The threats had been eliminated, and the accounts had been settled. I'm thinking about teaching, Daniel said. Maybe consulting work with the State Department on international security issues. Something that keeps me busy but doesn't require the kind of intensive planning I've been doing. Kyle nodded, understanding that his father was transitioning from warrior back to civilian, a process that was never simple for men like Daniel Morrison. That evening, Daniel sat in his hotel room, video calling Trevor Walsh, who was managing the business back in Oregon. The Kozlov organization has been asking questions, Trevor reported. Apparently, Derek's death created some complications in their collection methods. They want to know if we were involved. Daniel smiled coldly. Tell them the truth. We provided information about Derek's location to interested parties. What those parties did with that information was their business, not ours. And if they're not satisfied with that answer, then they'll discover that Daniel Morrison isn't someone they want to have as an enemy. Daniel's voice carried the flat certainty of a man stating natural law. But I don't think it will come to that. Alexei Kozlov is a businessman, not a fool. He got his money's worth from Derek's suffering. Trevor nodded, understanding that Daniel's reputation in certain circles would probably prevent any retribution from Derek's creditors. What about Linda? Daniel pulled up the prison surveillance feed on his laptop. Linda Morrison was in her cell, rocking back and forth on her bunk. 8 months of psychological pressure had reduced her to a shell of her former self. She'd stopped eating regularly, stopped communicating with other inmates, and spent most of her time staring at the wall with vacant eyes. Linda is exactly where she belongs, Daniel said. Living with the consequences of her choices, understanding what it feels like to be helpless and afraid, serving as an example to others who might think about hurting children for money. The prison medical staff says she's having a complete psychological breakdown. Good. Kyle had nightmares for months because of what she did to him. Now she gets to experience that same terror, but permanent and with no hope of rescue. Daniel's expression was merciless. She'll spend whatever time she has left knowing that every sunrise brings another day of fear, just like she made Kyle feel. Trevor understood that Linda Morrison would never receive mercy from Daniel, and frankly, he didn't think she deserved any. Some crimes were unforgivable, and torturing your own child was definitely one of them. So what's next for you, Dan? Daniel looked out his hotel window at the Stanford campus, where his son was probably celebrating with friends who saw him as just another brilliant graduate student. Kyle had a future now, a real future, free from the shadows of his past. Next, I'm going to watch my son build an extraordinary life. I'm going to be the father he deserves, the grandfather his children will need, and the man Linda and Derek never had the privilege of truly knowing. Daniel's voice carried deep satisfaction. I won the war, Trevor, completely and permanently. My son is safe, my enemies are destroyed, and I can finally rest. You've earned it, brother. As Daniel ended the call, he opened a final file on his laptop, a letter he'd been writing to Kyle, meant to be opened only in the event of Daniel's death. It contained the complete truth about everything Daniel had done to protect him, every operation, every eliminated threat, every carefully orchestrated consequence that had befallen their enemies. Kyle would probably never need to read it, but if circumstances